What's up, beautiful people? It's a delight to have you here another time. It is time for us to talk about some ethics and morality. I have been working on this one for quite some time. This one, there's some months in between this recording and the last recording. And it's because I ran into a whole bunch of weirdness and obstacles when it came to this practice or this understanding of what morality could be in the absence of religion as we typically understand it. So, with that in mind, please give me a little bit of grace here and let's get into it. Let's see what we can see about this. Now, the first thing to remember here is that this shit is not up to me. This is not, I am not the arbiter of good and evil. I cannot tell you what to do. And this is not about what I think about things. This is not, I'm not going to present to you um, what I would like the world to be. I just work here. I don't know why it is this way, and I don't know. This is one of the things that I have been coming to this whole time is that this is a process of discovery, right? The world is a process of discovery. The whole world might be constituted around the question of fuck around and find out, right? And that is like the whole universe might be coming from that. And so the whole universe might be in a state of discovering itself all the time. And as such, we can go about discovering our own feelings or desires, and we can go about discovering what the world is made of, and we can go about discovery throughout our lives. And in fact, this is what I'm presenting to you here is based on that process of discovery, and it is not a construction of what I would like things to be. Um, so with that said, I'm not trying to tell you what to do. Obviously, I feel like I've been saying that this whole time. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. This is the idea here is that if we can use some basic principles of what is happening in the world, what the world am, what the world is created from, then we can use that understanding of what is happening in order to create best outcomes in our lives across time. Morality might be thought of as achieving the best outcomes possible. So, this is a project for you to work through for yourself. What kind of life you want to live, what kind of space you want to create, what kind of legacy you want to leave. This is this is for you to create your own best life. This is not for working for judgment. This is not for like casting doubt on other people, anything like that. This is about you creating the life that you want to create. Also, if you want to create a life of crime or a life of malevolence or something like that, like the basic understanding of how the world works will allow you to do that as well, right? Just because what I want is peace and prosperity, I'm not necessarily assuming that you want peace and prosperity. You can use these very same principles to create discord and disharmony and all of that stuff. Um, and you can get those kinds of outcomes if that's what you're after here. And ultimately, what we're looking at here is how the world functions. And as such, how do we go about creating outcomes that we want? Figure out what you want, always figure out what your goal is, and then figure out how to get toward that goal. So here we are going to conceive of morality as like the best possible outcomes. What is the very best thing that could happen? What would the world look like if it were the very best way possible? How would you be behaving in that best world that is possible? We're going to engage questions here about like how can you support your own best outcomes And also, how can you support others so that they can live well alongside you? One of the ways, one of the best ways to think about best outcomes, I think, is, the a lot of times morality comes down to, is the thing pro-social or is the thing anti-social, right? So a pro-social thing, pro-social behavior would generally be something that improves your relationships to your relatives, whoever that might be. That could be your family, that could be your environment, that could be the ancestors, that could be a lot of folks around. Like we can include trees and nature and animals and fungi and all of that sort of stuff, or in your relatives, or we could include people to whom you are related, or we could include fam or friends, or like the you are embedded in a network of relationships. And so if you can improve your relationships, then we will consider that pro-social. And if your relationships are not improved but rather are worsened, then we can consider that anti-social, right? And so again, this is not, I'm not here to cast judgment about pro-social is better than anti-social. Sometimes they're going to be, there's going to be wiggle room there. But broadly, in general, if you are improving your relationships to your relatives, then we're going to consider that a good outcome for the most part. And if your relationships to your relatives are worsened, then we'll consider that a bad outcome. Now, that's just how I tend to do it. You don't have to do that. Like maybe what you want to do is watch the world burn. And so there will be ways to go about doing that, and to become more antisocial. And the way is such that you can do either of those things. So, but what I, you know, and that's part of what I can think about as, like, you can detract from your own best outcomes, and you can harm others. Like there are, mm, so it's important to remember that when we are in a morally relative space, which is that space where I am not the arbiter of good and evil, and I assume that you are not the arbiter of good and evil, and it kind of comes down to perspective, and it comes down to scope. There is no universal good, that kind of thing. Then there is no right or wrong way to do things or to live in the world. However, if there is a particular outcome you would like to achieve, then there comes a right way to do that. And so if you have set a goal, then there will be a right way in order to get that goal. At least one right way. Sometimes there's more than one right way. It sort of depends on the thing, you know. I like the example of the internal combustion engine, right? If you if what you want is for your engine to turn on, then there's going to be a very specific and precise set of procedures that will allow that to happen. And if you don't do it in that particular way, then it's not going to work and the engine's not going to turn on. And so it's not that you are doing wrong morally in the world if you can't get your engine to turn on, but if your desired outcome is the engine coming on, then there is a right way to do that. And there are many wrong ways to do that as well. That is what we're talking about here when we're talking about achieving best outcomes. You decide on what your outcome would like to be, and then you shoot at that thing. Did you get that or did you not get that? That is how we're going to define what is right and wrong, what is good and what is evil, what is desirable versus not desirable. That's how we're going to approach things in this. That's how we approach things in this course generally, and in this way of understanding what the world am. So when we're so like, if we assume that pro-social, like improving relationships to community and relatives is what we're going for here. And then we do things that worsen those relationships. Then what we have to remember here is that even though we are not in a religious, we are not mm, embedded in a religious tradition that says that when you die you go to heaven or hell, and there it's based on whether or not you were good or bad in your life or something like this. You know what I mean? Like your deeds are counted up in some sort of way, or maybe you've confessed your sins or something like we're not involved in all of that, right? But hell is still a real place that you can go. That is to say that poor choices can lead to bad outcomes. And when you get bad outcomes, you really have to live with those consequences, right? And so if you do something terrible, let's say that you betray a lover or a someone who is close to you, an intimate relationship of some sort, and you betray that person, right? Um, and you probably knew better, but you did that shit anyway for whatever reason. Then whether or not some outside deity thinks that was a good or a bad idea for you, you still have to live with the consequences of that betrayal. And so that's going to be difficulty in your relationships moving forward. It's also going to be potentially torturous internal thoughts, that kind of thing. You have to live in those consequences, and that can be a hellish place to go, right? And so even though we are moving away from the model of a panopticon deity who wants to judge you for being a bad girl, right? Maybe we don't need that framing exactly, but the way still shows us that bad outcomes can come from my choices. And if I make choices that lead to bad outcomes, then I have to live with that shit. And so that is the way that we can think about good outcomes, bad outcomes, and um, a way like, is there a right or a wrong way or to live, or a right or a wrong thing to do? Well, it depends on how you want the rest of your life to go, right? So, all right. So this whole time, over and over, I keep talking about this is not about other people. We are not here to fix other people. Moral living is for your own peace. This is for you. This is for your internal peace. This is not for other people. Evangelism is unnecessary to what we're trying to do here. It doesn't matter if other people think what I think about the nature of the world. It doesn't matter. I don't have to convince anybody that astrology is real. It doesn't matter what they think. Evangelism is not necessary to what we're doing, and in fact is actively problematic. Evangelism leads to crusades, and I don't feel like what we need as a society, as a people right now, is more crusaders. I feel like what we need is more internal looking, and more of a sense of like, I want to create a better community and environment for my relations. And so I am going to do what it takes to do that for me and my community, right? We're going to lead with humility here, on the understanding that what might be good for me and my community might not be always good for all people, all community, all relations, all the time, forever. We understand that meaning is local, that truth is local to my time and place. And so what matters here does matter here, but does not necessarily matter in all times and places. And so what's good for me is good for me all by itself. And that is and I don't have to judge other people in other times and places and contexts based on what would be good for me. what would be good for me matters in my local community and not outside of my local community. Because, like, I don't know, man. Like, who even knows what's right in the world, what the right thing is in the world? I certainly not me. Maybe there are some other people out there who know. I tend to, this whole time I've been talking about questions over answers and all that. People who have the answer, I immediately distrust that, right? So I also don't have the answer, but I can find what's right for here. Moral relativism is inscrutable. When you're dealing with absolutes, when you're looking at the whole universe and stuff like that, there cannot be anything but moral relativism. Moral relativism is the only way that it can possibly work at the scale of the universe. And so what we have to do is we have to bring it down to the local level and see what's going on, what is important for me, what matters to me. That is the main thing that we need to look into. What's going on here in my life, what matters to me. And this is not about what other people are doing. This is not about how other people are living. Other people can live their damn lives, and it this is and I don't in fact, I get better outcomes from my own life when I am not spending my time judging what other people are doing. This is about finding my own way to peace and prosperity and not dealing with all of the other people and whatever else they might be doing. Now, that goes in the other direction too. I don't have to care what other people think about my sense of morality. What does your ethics and morality have to do with me? Ultimately, not that much if you're not in my local community. If you're not in the space which is locally meaningful to me, then your sense of morality and ethics might not have anything to do with what's going on in my life. I have often found that what other people think of me is none of my business. I it, good. This is good and bad, right? Like, if other people think great things of me, sometimes people say that I'm so wise or this kind of thing. Like, I'm always like, okay, hold on. Thank you for that. But like, you don't know me like that, right? I can think of plenty examples of me being just stupid, not even unwise, but outright stupid. And like, that's I love that other people think whatever nice things they think of me, but I don't have to live my life relative to their thinking of that. At the same time, sometimes people hate me. Sometimes people think that I am dumb and bad, and I don't have to listen to that either, because I can think of plenty of times when I wasn't dumb and bad. And so, because I can live in my own complex arrangement of individuality, I don't have to base my own sense of self on what other people are thinking of me. So, this concept of non judgment works in both directions. Ultimately, when we're looking at morality, then there's you know, in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig talks about quality. He talks about a concept called quality. And he ultimately gets to this place where he's like trying to define what quality is. And he ultimately gets to this place because it's like, it is evasive. It eludes him continuously for a number of years. And so he gets to this place ultimately where he's like, well, you recognize quality when you see it. You know it in your heart, and you just got to live with that knowingness, right? And so the way that I think about that in the space of morality is, um, what matters most is not what other people think of me. It's not what the clergy thinks of me. It's not what I think people in the Bible would think of me, or people in the church would think of me. Although in the church community, we're closer to that locally meaningful, pro-social kind of space, right? Like, in what people in my community might uh, think about me does matter to some degree, right? But what ultimately matters, and what I use as the guiding force in morality and ethics, is how do I feel about myself when I am by myself. So when I'm alone in the shower, it's a vulnerable space. I'm comfortable. There's warm water. I'm naked. If somebody were to bust in that moment, I don't even have solid footing. I would slip and fall and just die, right? I'm very vulnerable in this place. In that place there, how do I feel about my own actions? How do I feel about what I have done and how I have treated people? That, if I feel good about how I am behaving in that vulnerable place where I know I don't have to convince anybody, that I don't have to justify anything. I, in fact, can't justify things to myself because I know what I actually thought about and what actually seemed like it was reasonable to me. And I know if I did something that I shouldn't have done, I know that for myself. In that space, how do I feel about myself when I'm by myself? That is what matters most. So, we don't necessarily have to base our ideas of morality on an outside creator deity or something like that, some kind of laws or it's not about what Confucius thinks about what I've done. It's about what I think about what I have done. Like moral actions are often not the most profitable thing to do. They can in fact be detrimental to profits and to getting ahead in some kind of way. So then why would I do the moral thing? And I struggled with this for years and years. I was like, why would I do this? And I kept doing things that were morally good, but like I kept watching myself lose in important spaces. And I was like, why am I doing this? And the reason is because I need to earn my own respect. When I'm in that vulnerable space, I need to feel good about who I am and what I've been doing. And if I don't, then shit sucks for me. Then I go to hell about that. And so, because I don't want to live in that hell space when I'm by myself or thinking around my own self, I aim at moral outcomes. If what I'm doing is good with me, then and is creating what I think are the best possible outcomes in my life, then other people's opinions ultimately become irrelevant. If I think that I'm doing a good job and other people think that I'm not doing a good job, but I really think that I am, okay, then we at a certain point we have to agree to disagree on that. And there's a certain sense of negotiation that might have to take place when it comes to intimate or long-term or complex relationships, and there's plenty to talk about there. But ultimately, if I feel good about how I'm behaving, then my heart knows. It's the same sense of the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Our hearts know, and so this is much more about tuning into that than about subscribing to some laws that somebody got on top of a mountain somewhere. So one thing that is also important to remember here in this post-religion landscape is that morality is not purity. We're going to have to lean into some paradox here. Um, Sometimes two things can be true at the same time. Sometimes two opposites can be true at the same time. And so we misstep by leaning into absolutism. Absolutism gets us into trouble. It's good to remember that the economist Thomas Sowell said, there is no solution, only trade offs. Now, some folks hear me talking about Thomas Sowell, who is an economist. He's a black conservative, and motherfuckers hate Thomas Sowell for being a black conservative and this kind of thing. And because he's like on the wrong team and this kind of stuff. Um, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, uh, if a bad man has a good point, then maybe it's a good point, even if this is someone who you ultimately disagree with in most circumstances, right? This is the kind of like absolutism gets us nowhere. What we need to think about here is how, all right, so if I've decided that a person is a bad person, and so I'm not going to listen to anything they say. If they have a good point and then I reject that point, then the trade-off there is I don't get the benefit of that good point, and then maybe this leads to bad outcomes downstream from here, right? So what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to recognize that everything, everyone is a mixed bag. There are no good or bad people. There are no good or bad decisions. Good and bad are relative concepts, and they always come together. You always get both. You don't ever get only good or only bad. You always, like, if you are living in the world, then you get the delight of eating delicious things. And you also have to take with that shit and smelly stuff also. Like these go together. If you're going to eat, then that means you've got to cook and clean as well. Both of these things, they always go together. And so we never get the one good or the one evil. There's always a mixed bag here, and we are always going to be living in a tension of paradox. And so we have to be able to be comfortable with that kind of paradox. And even still, even in a paradox like that, you can't let the paradox paralyze you, right? Like you got to choose something, you got to do something, you got to make a decision, and sometimes all of your decisions suck. And then in those circumstances you can always be like, okay, well, how did I get myself into a circumstance where all of my possible options suck? Maybe that was me. Maybe this moment is downstream from some other moments, right? But you know you still got to choose something in that situation. And then that's a real charitable way to look at things. Also, maybe all the decisions are bad. Maybe there was a good option and I actively chose not that option. Right? um does that make me into a bad person forever and all time? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I can extend to myself and maybe even others the grace of understanding that maybe even when I make poor decisions, I don't have to be wed to only making poor decisions forever and ever. Maybe there are other things that can happen in this world, in this life, in this understanding, in this way of being. Maybe we don't have to cast me out for being a dummy one time, or even lots of times. I'm pretty dumb a lot of the time. All right, so let's think about preferred outcomes versus non-preferred outcomes. Ultimately, this is the same distinction that we make between benefic and malefic. I've talked about that a lot of times in the astrology and in the divination sort of stuff. Basically, benefics, Jupiter and Venus, are the ones that bring you comfort and stability. They bring a certain kind of moderation, and there tends to be a kind of homogeneity to what they do. They tend to bring things that are stable and predictable, versus the malefics. And the ben in benefic means good. Then the malefics are Saturn and Mars. Those are the ones that bring you discomfort. They bring you challenges, obstacles, sharp things, things that are difficult and troublesome, and that you generally don't like as much as they tend to bring extremes. They tend to bring things that are unpredictable, or that disrupt your plans and this kind of thing, right? The mal in malefic means evil, means bad, right? And so I typically, the way that I understand this is that benefics bring you things you like and malefics bring you stuff you don't like, but that those are not good and evil unto themselves. Sometimes it is better for you to get up off the couch where you're so comfortable and go do a hard thing, because that makes your life better. It brings you better long-term downstream outcomes than to sit and be comfortable all the time would be, right? So sometimes it's good to do hard things, sometimes it's bad to do easy things. And so when we're looking at preferable versus non-preferred outcomes, we're going to need to think with, okay, what actually is good here? What do we really care about? And over what timeline do I need to think about this outcome, right? So, like, when we're judging an action, it's best to ask, what outcomes does this action lead to? And how much do I like that outcome? And over what period of time would I expect this outcome to happen, right? So there are these important questions that we need to ask in order to understand what a morality could be, right? See, this is that paradox. We live in a paradoxical place. We live in a place of a landscape of complexity, and so we don't have absolute goods or absolute evils. Instead, what we have is questions. We have lines of inquiry which can lead us to understand this versus that. This is one of the things that I think about when I do card reading. Like, I've got a dilemma. Should I do A or B thing? Then I'll be like, okay, what is my outcome if I do A, and what is my outcome if I do B? I don't ask as often which one's good or which one's bad, or should I do this or should I do that. Instead, I ask, what happens if I do it, and what happens if I don't do it, and then I judge which one of those I would like better. Which one of these card readings do looks better, looks like something that I would like more or that I would dislike less, rather than which one's good or bad, right? Like, they both are options and they both lead to a world that comes from this. Which one of those worlds do I want to create? And over what time period do I expect this outcome? This is an important question, especially if we're looking into things like wisdom. I've heard wisdom defined as the capacity to sacrifice short-term pleasure for long-term benefit. This is, this is another one of those, like, is this an inscrutable truth? Is this one of the things, like, there will be times when it is appropriate to prioritize short-term outcomes. Sometimes you got to go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, or you need to eat something, or bodily needs of all sorts. You need to rest, or this kind of thing. Sometimes you just want to play. You just want to have fun. Fun is what we're doing in this moment, and so so you can play around and make short term, like a laugh. It's worth it to say the gross thing because it gets a laugh in that moment, that kind of thing. Also, glamour is another one where it's like, oh, I want to, like, dress up and look cute and have a particular feeling about myself because I have this outfit on or whatever else, right? That kind of thing. There's a short-term play there that is, like, I put all this makeup on and I don't live in this makeup necessarily, right? I'm gonna wash it off at the end of the night, but I want to be here in this place because it feels so good to me, and that rush is something that I'm looking for here, right? So there are gonna be times when it is appropriate to prioritize short-term outcomes. However, you know, you can still make the argument that, like, okay, so play is important, right? And so if we're going to play, then we're going to be prioritizing short-term outcomes. We're going to be prioritizing getting the laugh or this kind of thing. But there is an argument that over the long term, if you don't play, then this becomes a problem, and it creates outcomes that you might not like over your long term, right? So there's a the it always kind of comes back around to the long term, right? And so if we can think about what is the long term benefit and how long is our long term, some folks have said 7 generations is the play, is the like, if you can create a world for the seventh generation from you that is a desirable world, then that is the wisest thing that you can do. I'm not mad at that. That requires a kind of thinking ahead that is not customary, especially in a market economy. And so, um, you know, so then there's this question of survival as well. Survival is generally more of a short-term play rather than a long-term play. But if your short term leads to death rather than survival, then is that better for the seventh generation? You know, like paradox. Not sure. Not sure necessarily. Some it depends on the question always. We're going to be looking at it's going to be case by case every time, which is part of the reason why we don't use a legalistic framework for this, but rather lines of inquiry, which can uh, lead us down paths which give us more information and more complexity rather than less. It's difficult to deal with more complexity rather than less, but perhaps necessary because a legalistic framework gets so much wrong. It's the problem with government and bureaucracy, right? Like it's this idea that um, the legal limit is whatever the legal limit is, and if you're one past that, then now you're past the legal limit, and it's like, well, like that's not really how the real world works, you know what I mean? And so we're here in a real world space where the it's not as simple as like there's the cutoff line. there's there are questions always, that things get really fuzzy at the borders of the boundaries. Now, with that said, if we're thinking long term, I have heard, I think it was Austin Coppock said that about Saturn. He was talking about Saturn as being monotonous and as being boring, but that the least magic thing is the most magic thing. It's this sense that if you get up every day and you do the boring shit every day for a number of years, let's say 30 years for a Saturn cycle, then you will accomplish great things that would not have seemed possible in the first year. But because you simply got in there and did the boring, monotonous shit over and over, then over the long term, it yielded amazing outcomes. This is true at the 30-year scale. It's true at the 300-year scale. It's true at the 3,000-year scale. And so there is a certain kind of wisdom that plays to the long term that seems to me at least inscrutable. There does exist the danger of permanently deferring gratification. And so you can get into a place where it's kind of ascetic and, there's the denial of pleasure almost out of habit. Like it becomes denial for denial's sake. I've been in this place before where like, you start to fast and and by you, I mean me. I went through a period of fasting for a while where I was like fasting and fasting, and then it just got to a point where there's a kind of perverse pleasure in not giving myself pleasure that doesn't necessarily lead to best outcomes, but that becomes it becomes this it becomes a metric. Anytime there's a metric that you aim at, then the metric exists to be gamed. And so that is what ends up happening sometimes when you like move into that aesthetic space. But um, it is so strongly, like the long-term play is so strong that it's worth navigating that to me. Um, then, oh yeah, so there's also a question of how much work do you want to do? And so a lot of times when we're thinking about a short-term play, then laziness will come up with a short-term play. But then I often have found that laziness actually makes more work and more difficulty for you in the long term. It's do I wash the dish as soon as I'm done with it, or do I let 1,000 dishes pile up in the sink and then make it more difficult for, then I can't use the sink because the sink is full of dishes. And so I've got to move shit out of the sink, and then I've got to make space over here, and then and then I've got to clean up that after I'm done with it. There's more work because I was lazy than if I had than the less work of actually doing the work in the first place, right? So um, these are the kinds of things that we need to think about when we're thinking about long versus short-term plays. Now, the easiest way to do a good job is to cultivate the habit of doing a good job. So every time I eat off of a plate, then I wash that plate immediately. And that just is what I do. That's a habit that I've created for myself. Then that is the way that I make it so that I don't have all this resistance. I don't feel like it. Oh, I just feel like sitting down or like whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like if I just don't cultivate that, but rather every time I just create this habit for myself that as soon as I get in the crib and I take my coat off, then the coat doesn't go on the couch. The coat gets hung up immediately. Every time I have this habit, the coat gets hung up immediately. Then I don't have to deal with the coat being where I want to sit ever, right? So how you do one thing is how you do everything. So how the way that you create a better outcome for yourself is by cultivating habits that create those good outcomes. That makes it easier for you to do. So while we're thinking about Saturn here, you know, Saturn being the planet of consequences and slowness and the long term and boring things and stuff like that. Saturn is also the planet of responsibility. And here we need to think about the responsibility that we have to participate in the world as it stands. So um, this is important because non-action is a kind of action, is a kind of participation. And so you never at any point stop being responsible for your piece in things. Even if you don't do anything, you always participate. You have to participate. It's not a sense of like you gotta do it because you have, like you've got, like you literally have to. There is no way not to participate in the world. So like the way that I often think about this is like if you breathe in the world, then you are doing a chemical exchange which changes the environment that you're in, and it changes though, like you breathe, and that makes it possible for plants to breathe, and vice versa. There's an exchange that always takes place there. So you are always changing your environment. If you're eating, if you are using the bathroom, if you are breathing, if you're doing any of the body stuff, then you're always going to be changing your environment. So you always are participating in the world. And so, because your participation literally is the ongoing creation event, you create the world that comes in the image that you intend for. There is a question about, well, what kind of world do you want to create with your participation? If you are to participate in this way, in whatever way that you choose, then what kind of world do you want to create that is downstream from that participation? So, what you're going to want to do is a good job. Do a good job doing the thing that you mean to do. So, one way that we can characterize morality here is as aim achievement, as doing the thing that you meant to do, as hitting your target. This is in fact the one of the ways that sin is characterized in the biblical tradition is that sin is it's actually an archery term, and so it's this idea of missing the mark. So to sin is to shoot at a thing and then not hit that thing. Right, is to hit something else. And like if it's archery, then and you missed your mark, then that means that something got an arrow and it wasn't the thing you intended. Was it your friend? Was it someone who was it useless? Like there it's not what you wanted, right? And so to if you aim at a thing and you achieve that thing, then we might think of that as being a good job. In order to do good in the world, you must be effective. You have to be effective at doing your thing in order to do good in the world. So, you know, it's the same distinction as like, are you a pacifist because you want peace because you are weak? Is it because do you want peace because you can't defend yourself? Or do you want peace because you don't want to have to beat somebody down, right? The difference there is palpable. It's a very different situation. And pacifism doesn't count if you're too weak to back anything up, right? So it is up to you to be effective. And by being effective, then you can do good in the world. So with this in mind, then it becomes more moral, or it becomes ethical to exercise. It becomes ethical to study, to practice, to make yourself better at doing the things that correspond to the intentions that you've set. Get good at doing what you do. Go to bed. Go to sleep. You will be more effective if you sleep enough. And it is therefore moral to honk shoe to your heart's delight. This is so true. Like, go to bed. If you make yourself weaker and less effective, then how can this be moral? How can this be better for the world? How does this generate better outcomes for you long term? How does this generate better outcomes for your community to which you are locally meaningful? How is that possible? Do a good job, take care of yourself. Now, quickly, this does not mean that good only happens if you make it happen, right? Good things, good outcomes can happen by serendipity as well. And this is to be celebrated. This is a beautiful thing. We love to see it. But when good things happen and it is by serendipity, that is not because of your moral virtue. This is very important. It's important to remember that serendipity is not because I did a good job doing the thing. Serendipity is just beautiful all unto itself. Sometimes I do a good job and I create good outcomes for myself, and is a uh, that is an exercise in moral virtue. But when it just happens, that's not, it's beautiful and we can love that, but that is not morally virtuous. Perhaps what might be morally virtuous in that situation would be to be grateful, to lean into gratitude. Then when serendipity happens, we can have gratitude for that. And then maybe that is the ethical move in that moment, right? So you're going to want to get really good at doing your thing in order to be good in the world, right? But get really good at doing what? That is ultimately the question over and over. What kind of outcomes do I want to achieve in the world? What do I really want? Well, okay, let's see here. I want to make the world a better place. Well, okay, great. I love that for you. uh, what does that mean? What is the world? You know what I mean? Where is the world? So always we're going to scale it to the local. I can do things in my environment that improve my environment right here where I am. So this is the idea that like when you're out walking in the park or in the woods or something like that and you see an empty bag of Doritos out there, then you can pick that bag up, and it is morally virtuous for you to pick up some litter because it improves the environment that you actually are in, right? The place that is locally meaningful to you is improved because of your actions, right? Even if it doesn't really change the problem of littering in the world and the problem of trash and landfills and all of the rest of that, right? Like that is at a scale that is too big for a person to navigate, and so that's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is trying to make the world that is immediately local better, a better place to live. And so we can always think about what can I do to improve my locally meaningful environment. Also, what can I do to make it worse? I do that sometimes. Sometimes I do things that don't make the world a better place, but in fact make the world a worse place. What am I doing to make my locally meaningful environment worse? These are important things for me to make sure that I am paying attention to. So if I am aware of what a better and worse outcome would be for my locally meaningful community environment, then because I have that sense of intention, of goal, then I can let the world organize itself. Like if I have my goals and intentions set already, then the world of information will organize itself to show me which things help move toward my preferred outcomes and which ones move me away from my preferred outcomes and perhaps toward my non-preferred outcomes, right? So I can go about understanding what is moral, what is ethical, what is proper by organizing around my intentions. So the thing about that is that it is not clear that, I don't know, like free will exists. Here's the thing. I I generally think of the free will versus predestination debate as being kind of irrelevant, but it's real relevant here because, like why does what I do matter is ultimately what we're like navigating here. And what I notice about the world is that much of the world seems to be automated. It is not automated in the sense that like it's computer driven or something like that, but stuff does what stuff does because it does that thing. Generally because like it's in the shape of the thing that does that, right? So at the molecular level, then we can think about certain atoms. Like carbon is my favorite go-to example. Like the shape of the carbon atom creates all of organic chemistry because carbon is shaped in such a way that it binds to all this other stuff. And so it does that just because of the shape of the thing. I don't, like there's plenty to think with on desire and the idea of like does a carbon atom want to bind to everything, or does it simply do that because of its nature, because of its shape? Like what even am desire at a certain level? But um so if that is, if we think of carbon as being, or the atomic or molecular level as being kind of foundational, then that kind of continues, right? So carbon will, or the molecules will arrange themselves, the atoms will arrange themselves into molecules, and then the molecules will have a certain discernible shape as well, right? And then they'll do the same thing. They'll interact with the other molecules in order to create larger structures, and then those will have a certain kind of shape, and then they'll interact with all the other stuff to create larger structures, and so on and so forth, right? And so then this is the method by which the world is created. And so there is a certain guiding principle to that, but in large part, stuff is just happening out here, you know? And so we can also think about that in like more complex structures. Like I like to think about sunflowers, for example. They're sunflowers follow the sun, right? That's why we call them sunflowers, because they like want to face the sun all day long. So they move in order to face the sun. Now, is that because they want to face the sun, or because that's what they do? That is simply what they do, and so they do the thing that they do. Sure. Do they want it? Do they not want it? Kind of becomes irrelevant at a certain point, right? It's the way that they operate, right? Now, I posit that this is true about people as well. So even though we have the sense of intention and will, and like, oh, I want a certain thing, and so I go toward that certain thing or away from the stuff that I don't want, right? Frequently, away from the stuff that I don't want is a more powerful drive than toward the thing that I do want. We have that feeling of intention and will, but like, you know, you can still look at trends and the way that behaviors sort of happen in the world. And you know, how many times have you woken up in the middle of a habitual behavior and just noticed that you're doing the thing, and it wasn't even necessarily intentional? Like one of the things I have noticed that I scratch my head when I think, you know, and this is like this has been, I remember noticing that as a child. Like cartoons would always show people when they were thinking, then they would like show show someone scratching their head. And then I started to notice myself, especially since I spent all this time on camera now. I started to notice myself scratching my head when I would think. And why do I do that? Is it because I want to like fit in with everybody else or something like that? I don't think so. I think that like, well, I scratch my head because it itches in that moment. So the question is, why does my head itch in that moment? And so there's all like, I don't actually know why my head itches in that moment. I do know that my head itches in that moment, and I know what to do about an itch, and so I scratch it. And so then in the act of scratching, I'll like notice that I'm scratching my head, and it'll be like, where did that action come from? Well, you know, it's rooted in this place. Okay, so it's rooted in a feeling. And so where are the feelings coming from? Well, maybe it's biochemical in nature. And so that leads us back to the molecule space where I was before, right? And so there's all of this kind of give and take around the way that actions come to be in the world, right? And so then, because we can understand that, so we don't necessarily have to get into, is the world predestined, or is it free will, and like, is it one or the other, or is it a spectrum, or is it something? It doesn't really matter that much. What we can notice is that there is plenty of automated behavior even at the level of humans. Maybe it's all automated at a certain level, right? So then, if we can understand that there is automated behavior, then perhaps we can arrange things in our lives that make the most of that automated behavior. Maybe, you know, this is the kind of way that, like, if you know that you are going to have some emotional triggers, then you can make yourself, you can give yourself tools so that when you notice that the emotional triggers are happening and your heart rate is going up and you're starting to freak out and stuff, then you can be like, okay, hold on, I recognize this thing and I have these tools available within arm's reach because I knew that this was going to happen. And so I put this within arm's reach so that in this moment I could reach for it. Right? So it's the sense that I can arrange the things in my life or in my locally meaningful environment that make it possible for me to make better decisions when I'm in the place of automation. So, like I used to manage an acupuncture clinic. And when I was there at that acupuncture clinic, then um, I needed people to, and I was like working the desk also. So like people would come in and they would have umbrellas and they would have coats, and I needed them to dispense with all of their excess stuff and then come and say hi to me and then await instructions, and then I would instruct them as to how to move through the rest of their appointment, right? And so I arranged things once they came in the door. It was like immediately there's an umbrella bucket right here. And then I arranged things so that it looked like it would be easy for me to just walk in here to the coat closet and I could just hang my stuff up right there immediately, right? And so people would come in and they would have these ideas as if they were their own ideas. And so I didn't have to tell people what to do with the umbrella or their coats because I had arranged things such that they would have these ideas themselves. They would believe them to be their own ideas. And then they would go through the process that I had arranged for them already. They didn't think about it as being my idea that I had put into their heads. They simply thought of them as their own ideas, right? This is a practice called behavioral engineering. This is a whole field, and you can use this in your life. You can use this to control other people's actions in the way that I just described. You can use it to control your own actions. You can arrange things such that you can get outcomes that you would prefer because things are arranged in a particular kind of way. So, because automation is happening a lot of the time, and then we might think about automation as flow, right? So, what shape does the flow take in this given circumstance? Always, that is the way, right? That's what the way is. I've described it as like when you pour water out of the pitcher, then because the pitcher is shaped in a particular way, then the flow that comes out of that is in a particular shape, right? And the water knows what shape to make because of the shape of the whole circumstance and environment, right? The way that happens is the way. And so all of the rest of the ways that things happen by this automated format, when the enzyme bumps up against the protein that it's supposed to interact with, and it goes in there, and then they have their interaction just by nature of them being in the same place and time and shaped in this way. That is the way. So when I talk about automation, that's what I'm talking about here. And so you can get into that and you can make that work for you in ways that are actually useful and that help to cultivate your preferred outcomes. So arrange things into a shape that creates a flow that you would prefer. So what you're going to do is you're going to define your intention. So I want people to uh, put their umbrellas in a place that doesn't create a bunch of water and chaos in the rest of the clinic. I want people to put their coats down in a way that is quiet and that gets them out of their own way and that keeps them out of my way as well. Okay, that's what I want. And so, how can I arrange furniture so that it would lead to that outcome? And then I'm going to arrange some furniture and I'm going to let some people come in. And if they walk past, which happened a lot of times, people would walk past the umbrella can and then just drip water everywhere. And I was like, okay, that spot is not where they're going to see the umbrella can and be like, oh, this is the right thing for me to do here. They're gonna so so I would test my hypothesis, which was if I place the umbrella can right here, then people will put their umbrella in it. And then if people walk past the umbrella can without putting their umbrella in it, then now I know I've run the test. That spot's not going to do it. So where can I put the umbrella can so that they see it and have that idea on their own selves, right? So what we're doing here is we are creating conditions where the flow can yield best possible outcomes, right? So this is important. This is very important. So rather than, so if we think about a morality as like a kind of muscle where you're just like, I have to like in a world that is immoral and that's going to pull me in all kinds of bad directions, then it's up to me to just muscle my way into doing the right thing. Like that is not going to work most of the time. Most of the time, the flesh is weak is the phrase for that, right? That's not going to happen. So what you need to do is you need to create conditions, you need to create circumstances in your life that make it easy for you to create good outcomes in your life, right? The way that I think about this is as a conductor, right? So a conductor, you know, like I've sung in choirs and stuff like that, so I think about a conductor in that capacity. But you could also think about a conductor as a vessel that will conduct electricity, for example, that will move the energy from here to there and will channel it in a particular space and direction. Um, you know, and this could be true. You can conduct electricity, you can conduct wind, you can like all any kind of flow that's happening, you energies of all sorts, vibrations, that kind of thing, you can always conduct them and move them in a particular direction. And so I think of the magician is just like the actor, the one who is like trying to create their best outcomes in the world, as creating, as being a conductor, right? As being like, okay, so if we shape things in this kind of way, then we can get the flow to come out in this way that would be beneficial. And so working with the energy that's around and conducting that energy in a way that is desirable is the move here. So creating conditions as to promote best outcomes. All right, so thinking with this idea of the choir, in which singing together is such an important part of the way that I live, that um, it is, and it's an important part of my spiritual practice, and I think an important part of the spiritual practice of humans for such a long period of time that I think that it's worth thinking into. So, and like so if we think about morality as harmony, as a proper relationship between individuals, between objects in space, that kind of thing, then we might get somewhere. We might get somewhere with this, right? So harmony is measured by agreeable, thriving outcomes. So that is to say that if you are singing in a choir, or maybe you're playing the piano or something like this, playing the guitar, playing anything that's got multiple notes all at the same time, then when you play a chord or sing a chord, you sing several notes together and they sound good. Why do they sound good? Well, they sound good because of their relationship to one another, right? And so it's not that a particular frequency is a good frequency, but rather that this frequency sounds good in relationship to another frequency which is placed at a certain interval against one another, right? So like, so standard tuning. Oh, this is about to get real musical and nerdy. This is, I'm sorry, y'all, but stick with me for a second. So standard tuning is 440 hertz is your A, right? And then and so then all of your other notes are going to be mathematically related to that 440, right? But you don't have to use 440. You could use 438. You could use 432. There's been a movement recently with people trying to use 432 because it's like more mathematically symmetrical and whatever. Right? Sure, cool. 432 divides into the 108, which is the same as the mala, and then the 54 from that. And then if you look at the rosary, then there's 54 beads on it, like shit like that. You know what I mean? So cool. Sure, whatever. There's a lot of people who are like, why do we choose 440 and not 432? We could have, whatever. Doesn't really matter. The fact is that if you use 432 or 433 or 434 or add a decimal in between them, then consonant harmony is going to be relative to that point, right? So it's not any one note is consonant, but rather notes in relationship to one another are what drive consonants. And furthermore, dissonance can further drive your consonants, right? So you can have moments in your piece, in your music, that have dissonant harmony, that have uh, notes that clash against each other. And that feeling of clash can then resolve to a consonant place that can make you go, ah. And you don't get that feeling without the dissonance coming first, right? And so not only is it about notes in relationship to one another, but also across this period of time, then over time, then the relationship between dissonance and consonance, between tension and release, gives us a feeling of meaning, of something being worthwhile, of something being good, having gotten to a place and it's like, oh, it's good that we went through all that. That sense comes from this sense of harmony that happens in the one moment, stacked all in the one moment, but then over time together, right? And so when you're singing in a choir like that, or you're playing in a band, shout out to Nick Cannon, one band, one sound, right? All of that, then it's your job to play your part, to sing your part, to do the thing that is right for you to do in that moment. So if you are singing tenor, you best not come up in here singing the soprano part. That's not what we need tenors to do. We need the tenors to sing the tenor part and the sopranos to sing the soprano part. We need altos to do alto shit. We don't need altos to sing no soprano parts because there's a reason for each of us to be different. We do different things because we are shaped differently. And this literally comes down to the shape and size of your vocal cords. Because your voice is shaped in a particular way, because your larynx is shaped in a particular way, your voice sounds a particular way, that suits you to any of these particular forms. And then because you are shaped in that way, then you do that job. And if you do that job well, then that supports the whole community. And it supports not only the whole community of choir, but also those who are simply around us and happen to be listening. We do a good job together because of how we each are individually shaped. And if you are shaped in a particular way as to have a certain kind of role and then you play that role well, then that serves our whole community, right? So, what we're looking at here is individual singers who can play their own role, but then also the magician is the conductor, right? The magician is the one who recognizes what shapes uh, and roles are available, what is happening in this environment, and how can those be channeled or conducted or directed so as to be in proper relationship to one another, stacked vertically in the simultaneous moment, but then also across time. How can we make sure that each of the individual parts is in a harmonious relationship relative to everyone else? This is what the best story could be, right? So a story is going to happen across time. A story is essentially an image across time, right? And so the image is going to be your stacked relationship, and then your story is going to be your relationship across time. And all of that comes down to individual players doing their best, playing their role, and doing it in proper relationship to everyone else. If we can have everything arranged into its proper place, then we then that is the most agreeable, best possible outcome. Another way that we might think about morality, which is closely related, is the garden. We might use a garden metaphor here. So the garden metaphor shows up a lot. I didn't come up with this one. I mean, I didn't come up with the choir one either. Tolkien in the Silmarillion says something about the universe being a song, and there. So like, I didn't read the Silmarillion. I don't really like Tolkien that much, but I'm aware that that is a thing and all that, right? But and it probably goes back further than that. But the garden similarly is not something that is new, but is well worn, utilized. So um, in the biblical text, then the place of perfect unity with God is understood as a garden. It's called Eden, this garden, right? And then when sin starts to happen, when people start to miss the mark, then people are cast out of the garden. And then there's a certain sense of like trying to get back into the garden, right? And so, garden is in this story understood as a kind of um, blissful perfection, right? Um, it is also frequently understood that the garden is the place that you go after you die. Um, People who have near death experiences often are they have this description of literally dying sometimes and going all the way to the next place, and when they arrive in the next place and they're like, oh, this is a garden and it is comfortable and delicious and beautiful here, and everything seems to be in its proper place and functioning beautifully, and everyone is thriving, and it's a beautiful place. And then for whatever reason they like feel like they have to come back, and then they come back to our side of things, and then they to the mortal side of things, and then they describe this place. This is a common experience. This is not one person has having said this. Lots of people describe the garden that happens over there, right? This sense of like a beautiful, thriving, harmonious kind of place, right? um, then we can also think about, there is a hypothesis that the Americas are a kind of garden. Like, not anymore, but at the moment that the colonists arrived, then they didn't recognize what a feat of gardening had taken place in North, Central, and South America by the people who had been living there beforehand. People have described, most especially North America and the Amazon rainforests, but I would guess larger swaths of land than that. Um, Indigenous people were they could consider themselves caretakers of the land, and so they would go about creating environments which would promote thriving, not only their own thriving. You hear about indigenous people having burn traditions, like having ways of burning forests and land in such a way that it would ultimately create more thriving in the long term, that kind of thing. And creating watering holes and stuff like that. Not for them necessarily, but just because the forest is a better place when everyone has some water to drink, and we can make that happen because we are, you know, there's a question as to what the role of humans is in the world. Um, you know, some people think that humans exist to destroy the world and destroy things and make the world a worse place. That they conceive of humans as a cancer, or as a virus or something like that. Like Agent Smith in the Matrix or this kind of thing. Um, but I think I did a an interview on the podcast with Richard Vanderbaum, who is an herbalist who was a teacher of mine, and he conceived of humans as a kind of brain for the world. And when he did that, then he was important, or he was careful to point out um, that the brain thinks of itself as being very, very important, and perhaps is not as important as some other things. Like we can look at the microbiome and all of this and maybe think that um, like the gut is probably pretty important and the heart is probably pretty important, right? So and maybe both of those things are more important than a brain would be. But so by thinking of humans as the brain of the world, we're not trying to elevate it to or elevate humans to a place of importance that is undue. But the brain does have a role. The brain does stuff, and that stuff is important. And a lot of what think of prefrontal cortex, you think of voluntary motion and discernment and logical reasoning and stuff like that. What that does is it creates a space where you can be like, yeah, this is these kinds of things lead to better outcomes ultimately, and these kinds of things lead to worse outcomes ultimately. And so that kind of discernment is a thing that can help us to promote thriving in the environment at large. If you think of your own brain, your own potential to make decisions and stuff, like you have what it takes to create thriving in your whole body by making decisions that lead you to prosperity and having enough money and having a place to sleep and finding partners and friends and community and all that sort of stuff. You have to make decisions in order to make most of that stuff happen. And that sort of stuff is very important to having a thriving body in uh, all together, right? And so if we think of humans as having this capacity, as being the brain of the world, as having this capacity for discernment and that kind of thing, then perhaps gardening, which is the practice of creating environments which promote thriving, is the thing that humans are here to do in the world, right? And so if we think of promoting thriving by creating environments, creating conditions, right? This is that same thing that we were talking about before, creating conditions that promote thriving, not just for me, but for the world at large, or for my locally meaningful community, right? Ultimately, it comes down to this pro-social, like, can I help my relatives to thrive kind of space, right? Then you can promote your own thriving, you can promote the thriving of others. And in doing that, you create a garden which, again, has everything in proper relationship to everything else, right? There's some stuff and there's some other stuff. And sometimes they touch and sometimes they don't. And it is the gardener's responsibility to make sure that everything is proportionate to everything else in such a way as to create thriving. So then, we got to talk about harm a little bit. We got to talk about outcomes you don't prefer. We got to talk about shit that you don't like very much, you know? Um, I do in fact have the capacity to make things worse for myself and others. Not only better, I can, any gardener will know that, especially if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have years and years, generations and generations of experience behind you, then it is very easy to kill all of your plants. you know? So, um, and yeah, it's so easy to do a bad job in the world. And sometimes you do that intentionally and sometimes you do it unintentionally, but sometimes harm still happens. And so, how do we navigate that? Um, it is not always clear. Again, we reject absolutism here. We have to think about things in terms of paradox, in terms of no solutions, only trade-offs. We sometimes get outcomes that we don't like very much, and sometimes we get outcomes that are not desirable, but you have to deal with it anyway, you know? And sometimes I did something that made bad things happen. And sometimes bad things happened even though I did my best. And, you know, um, there's a question as to what constitutes harm and what is an appropriate way to approach that. So let's think into this for a little bit. One thing that it's important to remember is like who doesn't prefer these outcomes, right? We gotta remember that like we're in this morally relativist space where it's like, okay, well, so just because I don't prefer these outcomes doesn't necessarily mean that these outcomes are evil. They're just outcomes that I don't like. Somebody else might like them, you know? It's the bear versus the salmon, Like if you if you see an image of a bear eating a salmon in a documentary about bears, it feels triumphant, but in a documentary about salmon, it feels treacherous. Um, and we just never escape from that. So when we are in such a situation as this, then the idea of blame becomes an important one, you know? Um, so, but blame, I think the idea of blame is a little bit overplayed, and I don't think that focusing on blame often leads to best outcomes. So blame assignment is all right. So we're gonna have to bifurcate here. There's cases when something bad happened, something not, a non-preferable outcome happened. We'll call that bad. Um, Something bad happened, and it wasn't my fault. It was just like somebody else did something, or it just is as it is, and this kind of thing, right? Versus it was my fault. This was some shit that I shouldn't have did, and it created a bad outcome, right? So we're gonna bifurcate here. So in the event that it was not my fault, then blame assignment is only useful insofar as I don't have to kick myself about it, right? So this is important. If something bad happens and it wasn't my fault, then I don't have to hate myself about it. I don't have to, I can always maybe look at how I got into that situation in the first place, and maybe there's something that I can do to sort of make sure that I find myself in better conditions in the future and stuff like that. But like sometimes it's just not about what I did, and so I don't have to um, perpetuate harm on myself because something bad happened to me. So if I can assign blame outside of myself, then it can help me to not have to kick myself here. Now, the problem with that is that I can assign blame outside of myself, even if I played a role in it. And so we have to be careful about that, right? But in the event that it legitimately is not my fault, then I don't have to continue to harm myself by blaming myself forever about it, right? Um, Blame assignment is also useful when it's not my fault. It is useful if I need to know that I need to keep a distance between me and someone who intentionally did something wrong or did who intentionally harmed me, right? So here we're not talking about somebody who you want to continue to have a deep relationship with, a complex relationship with. We're not talking about that kind of situation. We're not talking about a situation where you where something happened and it's complicated and um, like here we are talking about a situation where somebody did something and it was whack, and now I know how this is going, and so maybe I don't need to have that relationship with that person anymore, right? That is the kind of situation. Like, we there are going to be times when you need to be able to recognize a pattern in a person and keep some distance, keep a little boundary between you and that person and potentially others who meet that description, right? That's going to be some, like, if you are a gazelle and you learn to recognize a cheetah, you need to be able to do that, right? That is a very important thing. Predation is a real thing in the world, and you got to be able to protect yourself from predation as well as you can, right? So, blame assignment can be useful in that regard. Now, let's think about if it was my fault. Let's think about if I did something that I shouldn't have did, right? So blame assignment is useful in that case only if I can identify my missteps and then create conditions that help me to avoid them in the future, right? So again, this is not necessarily about kicking myself forever. This is about um, I need to change my outcomes, and that means that I need to change my inputs. And if I need to change my inputs, then maybe I need to change the conditions that led me to these outcomes in the first place. That is something that I can do. And so since I can do that, then maybe I should do that. And I should do that because I recognize that I caused some harm here and I would like to not cause that harm anymore. And so how can I reorient what's going on in my life in order to make sure that I don't do that thing again, right? Blame assignment when I am at fault is also useful if I can apologize to community members who were harmed, right? This is an important part of so this is something that you would do in the case that you want to, A, feel better about yourself as a person, right? Because what matters the most is how I feel about myself when I'm by myself. But then also, um, in order to negotiate a continued relationship with a person who has been harmed by something that I did, it's up to me to offer a genuine apology and think about how to repay that debt, right? So blame assignment is useful in figuring out what is appropriate here and then working through that. Blame assignment is outside of that almost never helpful. This gets back to we don't understand causation very well. So like if you don't know why things are happening, then saying that bad person is why it's happening is just reductive. It doesn't it's answer mode. It's not question mode. You know what I mean? Something that happens a lot is that when something bad happens, then it generates resentment. And then resentment can drive a desire for punishment. And then punishment only very rarely, if ever at all, does punishment improve long term or even short term outcomes? Punishment, so obviously, punishment and consequences are not the same thing. Maybe that's not obvious. Punishment and consequences are not the same thing. Consequences is what happens after the fact. A thing happens and then consequently something else happens, And so if you if you betray someone's trust and then they don't trust you anymore, that's a consequence of those actions, right? That is not the same as if you betray someone and then 15 years later you aren't allowed to vote anymore and you don't have access to dignity or housing or healthcare or something like that. You know what I mean? Like there's a point at which punishment becomes the desire for harm, for more harm, right? Punishment is spiteful. So if we think about the gardening metaphor here, so if you go about cultivating spite in your garden, then your garden becomes more spiteful. The environment that you live in becomes more spiteful. And so then we have to think about, well, okay, is spiteful the kind of life that I want to live? Is spiteful the kind of world that I want to create? Is that the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible? And this is part of what I was saying at the beginning about like, you can create whatever kind of world you want. So decide what kind of world you want to create. I'm not here to say that spite is a wrong thing to create in the world. I'm here to say that that's probably not the world that I want to live in. And as such, I think that punitive justice is not the move because I think that it creates more spite, and I don't want more spite in the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible. However, it's not up to me. What's up to me is how I go about living in my locally meaningful environment. It's not for me to decide for everyone who ever lives whether or not spite is something that they want to live with. That's up to other people, right? However, because I know what spite feels like and because I know that I don't like the way that spite feels, then I am going to be wary about being spiteful, even if it means that mm, harm goes unpunished, right? You never outrun the consequences of your actions, but you might avoid punishment. And I think that if we let Saturn do his thing, it's probably enough. That's what I think. So let's think about a moment. Let's think about if I have done some harm, I've done some bad things, and I did things that had downstream negative consequences for others and myself, and that was whack, and I shouldn't have did that. So, what does this mean? Well, um, I need to assign blame to myself insofar as I can recognize that I need to offer an apology, right? And so, apologies are important. Um, Apologies are important for creating relationships that endure across time because shit's gonna happen across time. One of the things that's really important here is that so an apology is a recognition of debt. Like I did something that you're not that created some harm for you and you're not going to be able to get that back. And so now I owe you something about that, right? Um, in a complex relationship over time, then that debt is not going to exist in a vacuum. There's going to be other debts that also surface over the course of that relationship. And they're not all going to be in the one direction. They're going to be it's complex, right? That's what a complex relationship is. And so um that is the point of an apology. The point of an apology is to recognize that there's a lot going on for a long period of time, and um, but that on balance, I want the relationship to be better for you than the costs are harmful to you, right? So I'm going to do stuff that harms you sometimes in this relationship, and I'm sorry about that, right? I'm sorry. That's an apology, right? I recognize that. I recognize the things that I am doing that have been harmful, and I'm going to try not to do those things anymore. And uh, I'm going to try to make up for those more than those things that are harmful to you actually harm you, right? Because on balance, I want you to be like, oh, this is worth it for me. This is better for me, all told, to be in this relationship than to not be in this relationship, right? So because of that, because of the nature of the apology, the vulnerability of it, it is not possible for an apology to be either rote or prompted. Now it can be prompted, but not immediately. Like in the way that you know in school, in grade school, like if you pushed a kid or something like that, then the teacher would be like, you have to apologize now, and then you'd be like, I'm sorry. And the teacher would be like, fine, go play. You know what I mean? That is a facsimile of the thing, and it does get you to like know what the format is, and so like that's useful insofar as that is useful because you need to know that an apology has to happen after a thing, and whatever, right? But that like, I'm sorry, that like doesn't count. It doesn't make anybody feel better. What it needs to do is it needs to be meaningful, and you need to actually be sorry about it. You need to actually recognize, you need to recognize what you did that was harmful. We need to agree on what happened, what the harmful thing was, right? So if I harmed you, then you have an idea of what I did that was harmful to you. I need to be able to agree that that was in fact the thing that I did and was in fact harmful to you. We agree on that point, right? Uh, I know what I did. I admit that I did this thing, and I know that that cost you some stuff, and I feel bad about that. And so that there's this sense of meaning that is not, it's not a sense of like somebody said I should be sorry about it, and so I'm saying sorry about it, but rather um, I have this feeling that is real and meaningful in my heart, and as a result of that, I recognize and admit that I have done harm, and that I recognize the cost that it came to you. I promise not to do it again, right? Um, that, or I promise to do my best. It kind of depends on the nature of the thing in question. Like, was I late? Was I late and I made you wait an hour or something like that? And the reason that I was late is because I have a non-linear relationship to time. Like time is weird, and so I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best on this one. I might be late again in the future because lateness comes in many varieties and this kind of thing, right? That is going to be far different from the betrayal that I've been talking about all this time. So, but I'm going to do my best. I promise. I see it, and I'm going to do my best to not do it again no more, right? And it's an IOU, and and I take seriously this debt that I have created here. I am in debt now, and I take that seriously. And by my communicating that through this apology, then you are aware that I take this debt seriously, and that on balance, I want this relationship to be better for you than the costs are harmful to you, right? That is what a real apology is. And so we gotta live, I I gotta do that as part when I have done harm, then that is an important part of me being able to look myself in the eye in the mirror and feel good about what I have done. You know, feel good about myself. even if I don't feel good about what I've done, I feel good about myself. I feel like an upstanding, upright kind of person because I do take my relationships and my debts seriously. Now, other times, I will have been harmed. That's when something happened that was outside my control, that someone else controlled, or that just happens out in the world because an act of God or something like that. But that thing had downstream negative consequences for me. So that is a rough shake, man. That shit sucks. We got to acknowledge that it sucks. It feels like it sucks. It just sucks a lot of times, you know? That is real. And you gotta tend to that wound. You gotta make the space for that. You gotta feel your feelings and grieve in the ways that you need to, and you gotta go through that. You know, there can be some sorrow that can come from that, and um, in feeling it, one of the things that I notice about people is that we have this tendency to fixate on negative emotion. And I've wondered about that for a while. And I think that the impulse there is that it needs to be made meaningful in some kind of way. There needs to be a lesson learned, or it creates some like the way that you be after that, or something like that. There's a sense of meaning that matters very much to the sense of wounding and sorrow. And so there is a kind of fixation that goes into that, where it's like you're really looking at it and you really care deeply about it. And that, yeah, it's really it feels so important to do. Now the problem with that is that it can turn into hyperfixation. You can look at that thing to the detriment of all the other stuff that's possible. And so then that can become a problem in itself, you know? And so there is an appropriate amount to tend to the wound before you also need to keep it pushing. Like you gotta do your healing about it. You know what I mean? You know, apology is not a prerequisite to your healing. Apology is a negotiation that you do in a long and complex relationship. So your healing and your ability to be in relationship with this person are not the same thing, right? So even if you decide you don't want to be in relationship with this person, then there your healing is still yours. Like you don't need an apology from that person in order for you to do the job of healing your own self, right? And so this takes us to the most terrible thing. It is the most terrible thing. Even when I am not culpable, I am still responsible. Even when I am not guilty, I am still responsible. Even though it is not my fault, I am still responsible for how I respond and how I move forward. Ooh, this is some bullshit. Remember what I said when I said this is not what I want, but I just work here? This is what I'm talking about. It's still my responsibility, no matter what happened. No matter what happened, it is. It's not always my fault when bad things happen to me, but it is always my responsibility to move my life forward. If what I'm doing here, if what I want out of this process of ethics and morality is to create a better life for myself, then it is my job to create my own better life for my damn self. I have the power here. That's the good thing about this, right? So even though it's terrible that I have to do my own healing, I have the power to do my own healing. And this is not dependent on the participation of others. I don't need an apology from the person who harmed me in order to make my own life better, in order for me to uh, behave in a way that creates better outcomes downstream from here. I don't need others to participate in that. I can participate in my own locally meaningful environment in a way that creates good outcomes for my life and for the lives of those around me, whether or not those who have harmed me apologize for that harm. This is key. This is very important. And the good news here is that it always centers me. I get to have the power all the time for creating my best life. It means that I have to create my best life and that no one else is going to come save me and no one else is going to make it better for me and all that sort of stuff, right? So it does create responsibility for me. But because the responsibility is mine, it actually makes it possible. Because what if this other person doesn't actually apologize? What if they don't feel bad for it? What if they don't um, think that they have done wrong? What if they don't care that I have been harmed? Then what? I'm just like, I just don't get to heal now because they aren't on board? No, I get to heal for my own self. And because I can create in my own mind's eye an image of my intention, which is the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible. Because I can do that, I can create that image and intention and then behave in such a way as to create conditions which would bring about that more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible. Because I can do that, then I can do that. I can create this more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible with or without the participation of those who would harm me. It's also worth remembering that I am not responsible for others' healing either. I may have done some harm. I may or may not have apologized. I can only do what I can do. And in the same way that others cannot be responsible for my healing, I cannot be responsible for others' healing. So if I offer an apology and it is not accepted, that's not up to me. That's not up to me. What is up to me is, did I do what I could do in order that I can look myself in the mirror, in the eye, in the mirror? Did I do what I needed to do in order to demonstrate that I take my debt seriously? If I have done what I can do, then I've done what I can do. And so that's going to be, I have made my apology and demonstrated that I take my debts seriously. I have also arranged conditions such that I don't do that thing anymore. I don't create that same kind of harm for that person or for other people who are similarly uh, arranged. I've done what I can do. So if I can have done what I can do and other people remain unhealed about it, there's a certain point at which that's just not my responsibility anymore. There's nothing I can do about that. And so it's going to be what it's going to be. Like, your healing is yours. And if you would prefer to continue to be mad, then you can do that. But that what we end up thinking with here is like, okay, well, how are how are your long-term outcomes? How are your outcomes coming out for you? Because, like, maybe it kind of sucks a little bit. And you know it's not for me to judge what others are doing. Everybody else is on their own timeline. They're feeling whatever they're feeling. They're going through whatever they're going through. That is what they're doing. And so we're just going to have to let that be. Because this is not about evangelism. This is not about me telling other people what the right thing to do is. This is about me finding my own best outcomes in the world and finding that I can create my own best outcomes in the world. I can do that. So, We are back again to paradox. What do you do with this paradox? If you understand that there are no solutions, there are only trade offs, if you understand that all of the actions are going to have good and bad that are associated with them, that are going to have things that lead to outcomes that you like and that also lead to outcomes that you don't like. And so you're going to have to mitigate against those and you're going to try to improve or lean on the things that bring good outcomes and stuff like that. But every time you make an action, it's going to have both good and bad associated with it. What do you do in that situation? Well, what you do is you ask, where does this thing go in relationship to everything else, right? You create the harmonious pattern of relationships where things are in proper relationship to one another. And because they are in proper relationship to one another, then things can move harmoniously, right? If you notice that there are parasites in your garden, then it is worth asking, what role do they play? What function are they serving? What job are they doing? Because you live in a garden, but your garden is embedded in the world at large. It is unlikely that your garden is going to destroy the possibility of parasites in the world, right? There's a niche there. And where there's a niche, life will find a way. So parasites aren't going anywhere. Parasites need to be incorporated into the community in a way that creates thriving outcomes in our long term. So what does that mean? Engaging that question is how we get to best outcomes over the long term. Ultimately, you have the power. You are an agent. You have agency in the world. You have the power to decide what kind of life you want to live, what kind of world you want to live in, and go about creating the world. You are the creator deity. You are at least part of the creator deity. So go ahead and create the world that you want to see.